The silence at 30,000 feet is not peaceful. It is a deafening, hollow void that demands an answer to a question no one wants to ask. Do you remember the weight of the hammer in your palm? Or have you forgotten the slow, deliberate friction of stone against feather? Before the sky became a tomb, it was a blank canvas, and we were the architects of our own ascent. Deep within the damp, forgotten corners of the labyrinth, a place where shadows hold more authority than kings, the work began. It was a rhythmic, meditative labor, a pact struck between desperate hands and raw materials. We did not dream of the sun in those days. We dreamed of the exit. We spent years measuring the span of our reach and the tensile strength of our ambition, layering wax like layers of armor. It was an exercise in calculated, cold-blooded patience. Every quill was plucked with purpose, every drop of adhesive tempered by the humidity of the cave. We were engineers of liberation, convinced that if we were precise enough, if we were humble enough before the physics of the world, we could slip through the cracks of our confinement. We operated with the sacred intensity of those who have nothing left to lose. There was a specific, intoxicating thrill in the craftsmanship. The feeling that we were stitching together a new identity from the discarded remnants of our prison. It was not mere survival. It was the quiet, burning arrogance of the creator who believes their invention is superior to the natural order. We treated the horizon as a promise and the wind as an accomplice. We polished the feathers until they shone like armor, ignorant of the fact that we were not just building wings. We were calibrating a machine that would eventually demand a price we had not yet calculated. The workshop was a temple of foresight, yet we left the most important component behind. The understanding that the further we ascended from our origins, the more fragile our own creation would become. We were masters of the ground, waiting for the sky to test whether our foundation was solid stone or merely a beautiful, melting ambition. The first moment of detachment from the earth is an exquisite, terrifying rupture of reality. One instant, the ground, that stubborn, unyielding witness to every hour of toil that remains beneath your feet, anchoring your identity to the mundane. The next, the world falls away in a silent, widening abyss, and the air you once exhaled becomes the very medium of your triumph. This is the intoxication of the maiden flight, the visceral realization that the impossible is merely a threshold you have finally crossed. As the wind caught the synthetic span of the wings, there was an audible vibration, a hum of success that resonated in the very marrow of the bones. It was the thrill of the pioneer, the undeniable verification that the hours spent in the dark, damp workshop had yielded a miracle. The atmosphere, once a distant, untouchable domain of gods, now offered itself as a playground of infinite potential. Every minor adjustment of the shoulders, every subtle tilt of the frame, resulted in a mastery of direction that felt like a divine gift. The ego, starved for years in the shadows of confinement, suddenly gorged itself on the boundless expanse. There is a unique danger in this elevation. When the trajectory is steep and the success is immediate, the mind inevitably conflates the effectiveness of the tool with the supremacy of the operator. The upward momentum feels like a personal validation, a celestial nod toward one's own brilliance. It is easy to look down at the shrinking landscape, the tiny, inconsequential problems left behind, and mistake the sheer altitude for an inherent evolution of character. We start to believe that because we have transcended the physical geography of our past, we are no longer tethered to the laws that govern the common traveler. The air grew thin, crisp with the promise of more, and the temptation to test the limits became a siren song of undeniable allure. The wings held, firm and responsive, confirming the illusion that we were special, that the laws of gravity were suggestions rather than mandates. We mistook the favorable updrafts for our own strength, forgetting that the wind serves no master. It was the golden hour of our ambition, a moment so bright and breathless that it blinded us to the simple, tragic reality. To climb is to be vulnerable, and to be high is to be dangerously distant from the only ground that could ever sustain us. The transition from mortal ambition to the delusion of godhood occurs in the space between two heartbeats. Once the initial surge of flight is mastered, the exhilaration curdles into a dangerous silence. We stop listening to the warning whistles of the wind against the feathers. We stop checking the integrity of the waxen joints that hold our ascent together. The internal narrative shifts imperceptibly, yet decisively.
I am capable of flight. I am the master of the sky.
This is the threshold where the horizon, once a goal, becomes a mere nuisance, and the sun, a glowing titan of heat and light, transforms into a trophy to be claimed. In the theater of a career, this is the moment we begin to view our own limitations as flaws in the system rather than essential boundaries of the human condition. We become architects of our own echo chamber, filtering out the voices of those who remain grounded, those who see the structural fatigue we are too intoxicated to notice. Every piece of advice from a mentor, every warning from a peer regarding the rising temperature, is dismissed as the timid musing of the earthbound. We operate with a new, frantic pace, convinced that if we simply push harder, if we sustain the velocity, we can outpace the natural laws that govern our invention. This is the tyranny of the eye. When the ego demands an audience larger than our capabilities, we begin to disregard the structural risks of our industry. We gamble with the foundation of our success, operating on a high-stakes altitude where there is no margin for error. We confuse our current momentum with permanent state of grace. It is a psychological trap of the highest order, where the thrill of the climb masks the encroaching reality of the environment. The sky is no longer a path to follow. It is an arena where we seek to prove that the rules applied to others are merely obstacles we have already bypassed. We are so captivated by the golden glow of our own perceived invincibility that we fail to recognize the scent of burning wax. We mistake the heat for glory. We have forgotten that in this altitude, the air does not care about our intentions, our prestige, or our past victories. We have moved from the phase of deliberate creation into a phase of reckless consumption, burning through our own resources to feed a flame that promises only to consume us in return. The radiance of the zenith is a treacherous commodity. It is the intoxicating brilliance of the spotlight, the high-stakes validation that pours down in golden torrents, demanding we perform ever higher to justify the spectacle. We become addicted to this illumination, mistaking the blinding glare for a source of nourishment. We forget that the light which reveals our ascent is the very same force that tests the structural integrity of our resolve. In the business of ambition, we often find ourselves drifting into the solar glare of success, drawn by the siren call of prestige, growth, and the ceaseless applause of a world that values height above all else. As the temperature rises, the atmosphere grows thick with the weight of expectation. Each additional meter of altitude requires a greater investment of one's own substance. We start to trade the durable, internal foundations of our character for the ephemeral, external shine of the moment. It is a slow, silent surrender. The wax, once a sturdy vessel for our aspirations, begins to lose its resilience under the persistent, unforgiving heat of public scrutiny. We become obsessed with the aesthetic of our progress, polishing the exterior to reflect the brilliance of the sun, while the inner mechanics of our life quietly begin to liquefy. We cease to ask whether our current path is sustainable or if the pace of our expansion threatens the stability of our core values. Instead, we become mesmerized by the sheer intensity of the glow. Every milestone becomes a reason to climb further. Every crisis is dismissed as a temporary turbulence that we are too gifted to suffer. The spotlight is a master of disguise. It makes the most precarious position look like the peak of achievement. We are so preoccupied with the image of our own greatness that we fail to notice the structural decay beneath the surface. This is the central paradox of the Icarus Syndrome. We believe that by staying in the light, we are becoming more radiant, when in reality, we are merely accelerating our own dissolution. The heat of the spotlight encourages a frantic, hollow performance. It demands that we sacrifice our patience for prestige and our foresight for fame. We are burning our own substance to sustain a spectacle, blissfully unaware that the brilliance we are chasing is destined to become the furnace of our undoing. The unraveling is never a thunderous event. The IT begins with the silent, rhythmic drip of a legacy losing its form. When the wax finally loses its tensile strength, the descent is not a sudden rejection of gravity. but a profound realization that the architecture of one's ambition was never as solid as the ego had claimed. It is a slow, agonizing process where the external facade of success begins to drift away, strand by feather, revealing the naked vulnerability of a life built on nothing more than temporary fervor. The air, which once held us aloft, now turns indifferent, pressing against our failure with the cold, impartial weight of truth. The anatomy of this collapse is found in the moments we chose to ignore the missed cues of our own exhaustion, the deliberate silencing of critical counsel, and the gradual erosion of the virtues that initially fueled the climb. When the structural integrity of our choices fails, the plummet is not an accident, that it is a mathematical consequence. We see the world through a distorted lens, desperately attempting to piece together the integrity of our wings, even as they lose their shape. The realization hits with a jarring clarity that we are no longer pilots of our own destiny, but subjects of the forces we foolishly thought we had mastered. It is a psychological dissolution. The prestige, the applause, and the intoxicating heat of the spotlight evaporate, leaving behind a profound, hollow stillness. We are left suspended in the vast space between who we convinced the world we were and the reality of who we have become. The descent forces a confrontation with the debris of our own decisions. We realize that the height we attained was not a triumph of character, but a temporary occupation of space. The grace we projected was merely a mask for a lack of genuine, sustainable core. As the ground rushes upward, there is a haunting recognition that the tragedy was not in the flight itself, but in the refusal to heed the limits of the materials. We are forced to witness the total dismantling of our professional persona. The descent strips away the pretense, leaving only the raw, exposed reality of the human condition. It is the final, quiet audit of a life, at the moment when the gravity of our choices finally reconciles with the height of our hubris, leaving us to confront the silence that follows the failure of our own grand design. The story of Icarus is not a cautionary tale intended to tether us to the earth, but a profound geometry of human ambition. It serves as a mirror, reflecting the dangerous gap between the heights we yearn to reach and the structural integrity we possess to remain there. As the feathers fall and the echoes of our ascent fade into the vast, indifferent sky, we are left with the ultimate lesson of the pilot, that the zenith is not a residence, but a destination to be visited with caution and returned from with humility. True excellence is not found in the reckless pursuit of the sun, but in the wisdom to understand the limits of our own materials. We often mistake the heat of our own momentum for the light of our purpose, failing to realize that the most sustainable flight path is the one that accounts for the cooling shadows as much as the golden warmth of success. The tragedy of the fall is not found in the failure itself, but in the vanity that convinces us we are immune to the laws of balance. To avoid this fate, one must cultivate the soul of Daedalus, the steady, observant navigator who values the destination over the thrill and the integrity of the journey over the vanity of the altitude. Look to your own wings. Are they forged from the solid, tempered elements of character, long-term discipline, and internal resilience? Or are they held together by the brittle, melting wax of ego, dependent on the applause of the crowd and the blinding glare of the spotlight? When the world demands more, when it insists you climb higher, faster, and brighter, remember that the most profound act of courage is the ability to maintain your altitude, to pivot when the heat rises, and to prioritize the endurance of your legacy over the brief, searing glory of a temporary peak. Let this be your compass. Success is not the distance from the ground. It is the control with which you navigate your path. As you move forward, seek not the sun, but the stars, those constant, steady lights that guide us toward a grounded, sustainable greatness. Build your wings with patience, honor the structural limits of your craft, and remember that when you finally descend, you should land with your character intact, your wisdom expanded, and your spirit grounded in the truth that you are, and always have been, enough.